Wars, since time and human history can remember, have been triggered off by a host of reasons: territorial aggression, religious crusades, and political ambitions. And it is understandable. However, some of the most mysterious and inexplicable wars were triggered off by something so ostensibly personal and intimate as the affections of one woman. It is in these stories that the love, beauty, or treachery of only one woman resulted in wholesale devastation, changing the fortunes of whole nations. Here we look at 5 such conflicts, not simply wars, but teeming with the deepest of human passions and extraordinary consequences when bound with the power play of war. The Trojan War, Helen of Troy, and the fall of a civilization. Perhaps the most famous war instigated by a woman is the legendary Trojan War, which has inspired countless retellings, not the least of which is in Homer's Iliad. At the center of this epic tale is Helen of Troy, oftentimes referred to as the face that launched 1,000 ships. The Trojan War finds its roots in a story of divine intrigue and human lust. The wife of King Menelaus was Helen, Queen of Sparta. Yet, when the Prince of Troy, Paris, visited Sparta, interference by a god occurred. Through myth, it was said that the goddess Aphrodite promised the world's most beautiful woman to be Paris if he would give her a golden apple as the fairest among the goddesses. She was Helen, who, depending on the version, had either willingly eloped with Paris or been abducted by him. The abduction of Helen from her husband provoked a frenzy in Menelaus, who called upon his brother Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, to rally the Greek states on a campaign against Troy, and thus began that 10-year war which finally led to the destruction of the city of Troy. The war pitted the largest of the great heroes in legends, including Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus, and brought about one of the saddest losses of life that history could ever recall over what was perceived as the betrayal and theft of one woman. While the historicity of the Trojan War is in debate, archaeological evidence does indeed tend to support that there was a major conflict around the ancient city of Troy in present-day Turkey during the Late Bronze Age at about 1200 BCE. Whether this was because of a romantic dispute about Helen or more practical reasons to do with trade routes and power, it is not known. But Helen's abduction is a powerful reminder of how the personal can get mixed up with geopolitics. The War of Actium, Cleopatra, and the fall of Rome's Republic. Another very recognizable war with a female protagonist is the War of Actium, which actually brought the Roman Republic to an end and gave rise to the Roman Empire. It is around the events of this drama that a woman stood in the center, the legendary Egyptian queen Cleopatra VII. She is more remembered for her escape with the 2 most powerful men in Rome at that time, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Following the assassination of Caesar, Cleopatra joined her fate with Antony on both a romantic and political level. Together, they tried to consolidate power with the aim of extending their influence across the Mediterranean. But Antony's involvement with Cleopatra was seen as a serious betrayal by many Romans, most importantly, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, and the future emperor. Things came to a head in the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, as the forces of Octavian faced off against those of Antony and his ally Cleopatra. To Cleopatra, the war was not only personal. As the ruler over one of the richest regions around the Mediterranean, she was an ally Antony could ill afford to lose. Antony and Cleopatra were completely defeated and ran to Egypt. When confronted with their likely capture, they both committed suicide. Cleopatra famously by allowing a venomous asp to bite her, though details of her death are still in dispute today. With their deaths, Egypt fell into Roman hands, and Octavian renamed himself Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The War of Actium certainly serves as a startling example of personal relationships that formed 2 massive political changes. It came between the fall of one of the most powerful republics of the ancient world and the rise of an empire. Wars of Scottish independence, Isabella MacDuff and the rise of Robert the Bruce. The Wars of Independence had been the hallmark of Scotland's long struggle for sovereignty against English domination. Here, the actions of one woman contributed to the rise of Scotland's most celebrated king, Robert the Bruce. Isabella, Countess of Buchan, was an extremely proud noblewoman with very strong loyalty to the Scottish cause. In 1306, After Robert the Bruce killed his rival John Comyn, he declared himself King of Scotland. Tradition had it that the kings of Scotland were crowned by the MacDuff family. Since her brother had taken the side of the English, it was she, Isabella, who ran counter to the will of her family and crowned Bruce at Scone to give a legitimate base for his claim to the throne. This act of defiance angered the English king, Edward I, who saw the coronation of Bruce as a personal attack on his authority. Isabella played an integral role in the coronation, one that incensed the conflicts further between Scotland and England. Soon after Bruce's coronation, Isabella was captured by the English. She was confined in a cage atop the walls of Berwick Castle by Edward I as punishment for her loyalty to Bruce and defiance of the English crown. Left at the mercy of the elements for 4 years, a grim reminder of what lay in store for those who dared resist the English crown. Though Isabella's story is not as highly recognized as other figures who played active roles in wars, she had the bravery to support Bruce and flare up the sparks of rebellion that eventually saw Scotland gain independence from England. The Anglo-Zanzibar War, a love triangle and the shortest war in history. The Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896 was arguably the shortest war ever recorded in history, as it only lasted a total of 38 minutes. However, its genesis was actually a no less dramatic power struggle, greased by personal relationships and romantic intrigue. It occurred after the death of the pro-British Sultan Hamid bin Thuwaini of Zanzibar, which was succeeded by the appearance of Khalid bin Bargash. He seized the throne without the approval of the British and aimed at independence from colonial rule. His rapid rise for power was in part dictated by his eagerness to marry the deceased sultan's widow, Sayyida Salme, who was said to have been secretly romantically attached to Khalid before her husband's death. Intolerant of a ruler not wholly at their mercy, the British issued Khalid an ultimatum to abdicate his throne. Refusing to do so, British troops began pounding the palace, breaching all his defences in a matter of minutes and bringing his reign to an abrupt close and replacing him with a new sultan who would prove more amenable. While the war was short-lived, it was persuaded by power interests that often bring about the succession of royalty. And this time, personal feelings on the part of a woman were the prime cause for the outbreak of war. The Mahdist War, Slatin's wife, and the battle for Sudan. By the latter part of the 19th century, Sudan was aflame in the Mahdist War, a revolt against Egyptian and British control, at the head of which was a self-proclaimed messianic figure known as the Mahdi, Muhammad Ahmad. Arguably, the most interesting but lesser-told stories about this conflict involved an Austrian officer serving in Sudan by the name of Rudolf Slatin and his wife from among the Mahdists. Slatin fell into the hands of the Mahdi's men and became a long-term captive. In that position, he was being forced to convert to Islam and to marry a local woman. Whereas initially this had been a strategic move on his part to ensure his survival, the relationship with his wife became more complex for Slatin as time went by. As he himself writes in his memoirs, she was crucial in helping him navigate the treacherous politics of the Mahdist court, eventually letting him escape and return to the British-Egyptian side. While it did not directly cause the war, Slatin's marriage and further escape is one symbol of the complex interplay between personal relationships and wider political and military conflicts. The Mahdist War was finally a bloody war with tens of thousands killed. It was at the same time fomented by the individual actions of people caught up in its tumults. Conclusion. From Helen of Troy's fabled beauty to the calculated marriage alliances of Cleopatra, these stories show the passion, desire, and loyalty of women that have determined history. Love, betrayal, or political intrigue. All these types of women became catalysts for war, their impact extending well beyond the personal sphere into the national and international arenas. These stories remind one that, added to power and politics, personal relationships can lead to conflagrations that change the course of history. Thank you for spending time with us through Spookscope today. Feel free to share your knowledge and wisdom in the comment section. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends and family. Until next time, my dear spooker, stay curious.